united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
If we do not renew our partnerships with the rest of the world, Europe will not be relevant.
We can make it if we are together as Europeans.
Do you genuinely believe that countries will manage to reach these very ambitious targets?
Good evening, and welcome to Politico Live, the live extension of Politico's nonpartisan journalism. Today, we're going to be holding a discussion on the uptake of technologies to fly net zero by 2050. My name is Jan Chański, and I'm a senior policy editor, and I'm in charge of defense and mobility coverage at Politico. We're coming to you from the Steinberger Hotel, and nice to see we've got a pretty well full room. We'll be taking a really deep look at a topic that's front and center for the future of travel and the EU's climate goals, the new technologies needed to decarbonize aviation. Today's event builds on a working group that we had a few weeks back when Tommaso Lecca, our aviation reporter, and some guests wrestled with the question during a working group: should Europeans be flying better or be flying less? Turns out it's not as straightforward as you think. There are real interlocking challenges on that. On the one hand, there's a push to regulate less and drive as much investment as possible into new technologies to revamp aviation. That's linked to a fear that if the regulation and the costs on the European aviation sector could make it uncompetitive compared to foreign rivals. That's part of what we're going to be looking at today. The EU has pledged to cut emissions from transport by 90% by mid-century, and that's part of the bloc's Green Deal. Aviation is responsible for about 4% of the CO2 that's emitted by the EU, and that creates a real problem. The industry has to decarbonize if it is to stay alive. If it fails, then the pressure to rethink how aviation works, and if the current structure of the aviation industry can be maintained, will really start to grow. The way that this is going to happen, if it happens at all, is through new technologies that can cut the carbon footprint of flying. And today's opening interview will explore just that. Is there a tech fix to help the aviation industry achieve net zero? After we're done, Tommaso will then dive deeper into the matter with our panelists. Before we go any further, we've got some housekeeping remarks. I'd like to thank our partner, GE Aerospace, for making this event possible, and also to thank our audience, both here in the hotel and online, for joining us. Here at Politico, we try to make events as interactive as possible. You can participate by tweeting about it, @LivePolitico, and you can also ask questions through Slido, and the way you do that is you use hashtag #NetZero2050. There won't be questions for the first interview that I'll be conducting, but during Tommaso's panel, he will be taking questions and he'll prioritize ones that are sent with a name and an organization. You can also share your answer to the poll question presented by GE Aerospace, and the question is, which of these technologies has the biggest impact on aviation decarbonization? And that'll be up on Slido, and I can see people already starting to answer that question. We'll get there. We'll sum it all up, and Tommaso will present the answers at the end. So I'd like to start by welcoming Alan Paxson, the Vice President of Commercial Strategy and Future of Flight at GE Aerospace, to the stage. Thanks very much. Thanks very much for flying across the Atlantic to join us on the. I don't know what that does for your carbon footprint. Probably not very good things, yeah. but thanks very much for joining us. There's a lot of talk about decarbonization and that sort of technology effort. You're at the sort of, I guess, the pointy end of the spear on helping develop some of those technologies. From your perspective, what? Looking at the next 5 to 10 years, what's the most realistic technological change, the first thing that's going to happen that will start to decrease the carbon footprint of flying?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. maybe I should just wait for the poll results to come back and answer.
They'll tell you exactly what you need to be doing.
But no, I think, when we think about propulsion in aviation and GE Aerospace, we feel very much a responsibility for this. I think 3 out of every 4 flights in the world today in commercial are powered by GE or GE partner product. This idea of continuing to evolve the technology for more better efficiencies and lower carbon footprint is what we do. We are today really amping up our game and trying to go revolutionary and looking at much more step changes in efficiencies. So your question back to over the next 10 years, I think is, it's a fairly short window for the aviation industry, 10 years. I would answer the question, like over the next 10 years, the products we are shipping today are, maybe 15% more efficient than what they were a decade and a half or so
products,
ago.
you mean the engines
The engines that power the airplanes that are rolling off the production lines today. So right away, you get almost a 15% improvement on the newer aircraft versus the aircraft that are in service, or even greater in some cases if some of the older vintages out there. So those are big step changes just with new equipment deliveries.
Is that retrofitted to existing aircraft to sort of to clean the existing fleet, or is that only going to be coming on the new?
It's coming on the new aircraft, and then we refresh the technologies when we overhaul the engines. So they degrade over time, and then we bring them back to that new standard when we overhaul the engines for maintenance. But so the new products, I would say, are having a real big impact. And then, sustainable aviation fuel is coming on. We all need it to come on faster, but that would be another ingredient. And, navigation services that we're putting in place, those are things that are happening real today, and over the next 5 years will roll out. What's really exciting is on that horizon out 10 years from now and further, where you start to talk about some of these more exotic technologies, open fan architectures that CFM, which is a joint venture between GE Aerospace and Safran, are working on, or hybrid electric technology.
For the audience, just like, can you just sum up what is that technology that you're working on with Safran?
The open fan technology is nothing new for those that went into college or university in aerospace. Open fans have been around for decades. Turboprops are open fans. But over the last 10 to 15 years, we've broken through some of the technologies that will enable it to be as fast as a jet and more quiet than a jet, and 20% more efficient than today's engine. So this would be a big step change in propulsive efficiency with this open fan architecture. The scientists in the room won't dispute the efficiency of it. The real challenges are in the noise, and that's what the breakthrough has been in the last 10 years. It's really got us excited, and we're developing today with Safran.
So is that technology ready to go, or do you still need to pass safety inspections and that sort of thing before you can actually?
For sure. It's a great question, because when we talk about new technology, again, this is something we've been working on for 10 years. It'll be another 3 or 4 years that we mature the technology to safely put it on a commercial aircraft. And then once we do that, we need to put it on a product, and it takes another 5 or 6 years for an airplane and an engine to get certified by the regulators. So, it can be 8, 9, 10 years away before it starts coming off the production line. And that's why the question about, what can we do in the next 2 to 3 years, that's a fairly short cycle for the aviation industry.
This does seem to be if you contrast with the car industry, the safety aspects of aviation do make the product development cycle much slower, whether it comes to tweaking fuels or engines or whatever. You can do stuff with cars that you simply can't do with airplanes at that level of speed.
That's right. I mean, it's, simply said, people joke about this, but you can't just pull over on a cloud when you're flying an airplane. And safety is top of mind for us. And I think most folks in the industry would agree that safety is always paramount. So we don't take that lightly. Everything we're developing today, we want to make sure that we understand how it works, when it doesn't work, why it doesn't work, and make sure that we control those parameters to make sure it's safely incorporated into new products that you and I and our families fly on.
In the EU, there's a lot of talk about sustainable aviation fuels. There's the SAF mandates that the EU has put in place. I guess there are questions both about the availability of ramping up supply and the price and the greenness of some of the SAFs. From your perspective, of somebody who's going to have to take these SAFs, put them into engines, and make them function, what are some of the challenges that you're facing on the tech side?
Yeah, I think our products today can run on blended SAF. All our products can run on blended SAF today. By the end of this decade, all our products will be running on 100% SAF, and that's a non-blended SAF with fossil fuel. Really, I think that challenge we can do. What we're actually working on, and our role in this industry is converting energy to flight and thrust. We need that energy to be clean, right? Whether it's sustainable aviation fuel or hydrogen or batteries, we want our propulsion systems to be able to run on any of these energy storage methodologies. So any of these, however you want to store the energy, we want to run it. But what we do with the fuel companies today is we're working to what we would call expand the spec. So today, aviation fuel or sustainable fuel has a fairly tight requirement around the fuel. It has to operate at extreme heats, extreme cold. It's got to operate with different bacterias in it. There's a lot of specification around the fuel that is used today. We'd like to make that fuel spec as large as possible so all of these new pathways, as we call them, for creating sustainable fuel can be considered. So the most economic means possible can be used to create the SAF. So I would say that's primarily our role is working on making sure our products can take any SAF that's specified today or even a little wider specification.
Great. We're in Brussels, the sort of regulatory heart of the EU.
Yes.
What are you hoping or asking from the point of view of the lawmakers and regulators in Brussels that would make your life, your technology development a bit easier for the?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mentioned CFM for a moment, but GE has been a partner with Safran for 50 years. We have gained so much by partnering, in Europe and in the United States together. The same thing's going on today with technology development. You're seeing many different areas that are all working towards the same sustainability goal. And, we like the financial help for sure, but we also like the way that working together with the different governments around the world to kind of unify us to work towards the same ends. Because at the end of the day, in big industries like this, common standards need to be applied. We don't want to find 50 different solutions. We'd like to find a few different solutions for the same product. Same efforts. This is a global industry, and we want that unification of those technologies. So, we're really proud of GE. We have 52,000 people working at GE Aerospace now. 12,500 of them work here in Europe, either designing, overhauling, manufacturing our products. It's really important that we really think globally about trying to solve this problem, so all the brightest minds can come together to solve.
There's a stereotype that the EU tends to focus more on regulation, more on the sticks. The US is more on financial incentives or carrots. Is that something that you kind of see from your perspective? Is it more attractive for a company like you to put investment development in the States compared to Europe?
Yeah, I think I don't think we selectively do that. I think my view of this is that it's okay to try different things in terms of how we progress things, locally and then more globally. So I like the idea of having some different ideas being pursued on different areas. So I'm open to that right now. We haven't quite figured it out, as you know. But yeah, no, I think when we bring the more minds we can bring together to work on this goal, the better. And I would say, we have a saying around safety in aviation that, we don't compete on safety, right? Safety is something that even if I'm at a manufacturer halfway around the world from your manufacturing, and I discover something that might compromise safety, I share it with you, right? I don't make it a comparative advantage because safety is a tenet for the industry. And I think sustainability and everybody being aligned on the 50 goal is helping us get the same way. You know, we want to share some of this technology so we all advance it together.
Super. Thank you very much. I'm afraid it was very, very short. We only had 10 minutes for the chat.
The real smart people are coming
Yeah, well,
up next.
I wouldn't say that, but I think you've actually set up some of the tech challenges that I think Tommaso and his panel are going to be able to dig into. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you doing this today, too. I really do.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jan. That was very interesting. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us on-site and online. I'm Tommaso Lecca, aviation reporter at Politico, and it's a pleasure to be here today to delve into the future technologies that could enable clean aviation in Europe. With me, our stellar panelists. Please join me on stage. So with me today are Philippe Cornelis, European Commission's Director for Aviation. Philippe oversees the Commission's policy work to enable the aviation community to reach net zero by 2050. Urania Georgetsaku.
Well done.
I hope sounds familiar. Managing Director at Airlines for Europe. Rania represents Europe's leading airlines, and she advocates for a new airspace reform to see a strong and competitive European airline industry while accelerating decarbonization. And last but not least, Axel Krein, Executive Director of the Clean Aviation Joint Undertaking. He steers the Clean Aviation Undertaking, a public-private partnership that supports the sector in reaching its climate targets via research and innovation efforts and funding disruptive technologies. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Axel, I will start with you. We just heard that what a big company is doing to reduce emissions from aviation. But I know that the Clean Aviation Joint Undertaking has about 28 projects to decarbonize the sector. I know it's difficult to pick one, so I will ask you to pick three. I hope it's easier. What are the three most promising projects that you are working on?
That's not so difficult. We are working on three main thrusts. One thrust is technologies for short and medium range aircraft, meaning replacing the A320 family and the 737 MAX family, so technologies for that one. Then the second one is hybrid electric regional, focusing on technologies for hybrid electric, as the name is, regional aircraft, as the name is suggesting. And the last one, but not least, focusing on hydrogen technologies, so technologies to allow hydrogen to replace kerosene as an energy carrier. So those are the three main thrusts, and our 28 projects are somehow distributed among those three thrusts. And one of it is the open rotor engine, which was mentioned by Ellen already. That's one of the main projects in the short medium range area, where we are targeting 30% efficiency increase altogether. The engine is hopefully and likely going to bring 20%, and the other 10% are coming from aerodynamic improvements and structural improvements. So altogether 30% there. We are targeting then for the hybrid electric regional also 30% improvement, so 30% less fuel burn. And then the hydrogen is applicable to both thrusts, because both thrusts can be either, these aircraft can be operated by sustainable aviation fuel or by hydrogen. And altogether, the benefit is first 30% less fuel burn, and secondly, then using SAF or using hydrogen, you get to roughly 90% CO2 reduction. So quite significant amount of reduction by using those technologies.
Thank you. Rania, this morning, Airlines for Europe had a CEO press conference. You've seen your open letter to the European governments and institutions, where basically you called for sustainability and competitiveness to be given equal priority. But one of the biggest fears coming from the sector is that European green rules could in some way weaken the European airlines to the advantage of the extra EU competitors who are not bound to the EU rules and taxes, I would add. what is the first thing that the next European Commission should do to reassure the aviation sector that Brussels is not working for Turkish Airlines or Etihad, you name it?
I think it's the role of the European Commission to work for Europe and for reinforcing our competitiveness. And I firmly believe, as an individual and, of course, as managing director of AFRI, that flying will always be an essential part of how we stay connected in Europe, both as companies and as peoples, connected to each other, connected to the world. I think Europe has successfully regulated some of the most ambitious targets when it comes to sustainability, and done that within the remits of its jurisdiction, and has also set out a global ambition to create a robust global system, which we support and encourage every opportunity we get. I also think that that has to be an obligation for Europe to reap the business opportunities out of that. So if Europe is going to be the most ambitious on SAF targets or on clean technology in aircraft and engines, Europe should be making that technology and have the global lead also on that, on the business competitive edge of that. And that will not only serve my members to reach the Destination 2050 targets that we have all set ourselves, both politically but also internally, individually as companies and as groups, it would also help create good jobs and create what some call strategic autonomy, strategic independence. But it basically puts innovation and new tech in the pipeline of Europe and keeps us globally on a competitive edge. And I say that as someone who has worked for photovoltaic, and I remember how ambitious our renewable policies are, and I also know what happens next in terms of where the manufacturing went and then what happened with trade wars. So I really hope that the new Commission will take the clean industrial deal and will make a very big chapter on aviation, because Draghi has said that we need 61 billion euros per year starting 2030 to make it to 2050. That's about the GDP of Slovenia every year for 20 years, and reflects that in a commitment around how do you de-risk investment in these technologies, how do you incentivize production, how do you help people get there.
Philip, I left you at the end of this first round of questions also to give you the possibility if you want to
agree with everybody else.
Agree or disagree, whatever, as you prefer. But first, I'd like to ask you about this issue of competitiveness. It is undeniable that the regulatory burden on European airlines is much higher than the one on non-EU competitors. In this context, major airlines groups such as Lufthansa have complained that the mix of green rules and national taxes could give an advantage to airlines operating long-haul flights via extra EU airports, with knock-off effect also on emissions and climate. Is the Commission looking into the issue of carbon leakage in aviation, and how do you intend to tackle this problem?
Well, thank you, Tommaso, and thanks for the invitation. Well, those who have read the political guidelines of President von der Leyen, they will have seen that the guidelines very much for a sector like aviation, they point to a continuity of policies on the greening of the sector, when we're going to stay the course on the greening, and I think the industry expects that as well and wants to be part of that story. But we will have an additional attention for the competitiveness aspect. Both the competitiveness of our airlines operators, but also the industrial capacity that is the greening industry that was also referred to before, whether it's aircraft manufacturing or other systems, fuel production. There is an enormous potential to create in Europe a domestic, if I can use that word, production of sustainable fuels with feedstock that is either sourced in Europe or brought in, but that is processed in Europe, will increase our energy independence as well as providing green fuel. So this dimension is going to get more attention in the coming years on the basis of those political guidelines, while at the same time we are pursuing the greening, and that will be the essence of the clean industrial deal as it has been announced in the political guidelines. And we will now, with the incoming commission and my new commissioner, be working on ways of putting concrete ideas and concrete measures to achieve that.
Not only because of green regulation and taxes, but also because of other factors such as geopolitics. We see some airlines now canceling their routes, direct routes to China. Is this an issue that is worrying you, and how will you engage with the airlines to talk about this?
Yes, it is an issue, and we are actually going to launch a study on the competitiveness on particular Asian routes and African routes. We will see what that produces. The measures that we've put in place on the environment, like the removal of free allowances and the introduction of the SAF mandate, they're only at the beginning now. So they will have their financial impact will come in a number of years. It's not yet there, but we have to acknowledge that there is a potential impact there. Now, the best solution to avoid our airlines, which are essential to Europe, by the way, we need to have network airlines in Europe. It's part of our industrial fabric. It's important to serve our economy more widely, besides the fact that, of course, there are a lot of jobs involved, and aviation is a strategic sector even in terms of defense and civil protection. So we need to protect having those network airlines being competitive. So we will look into this. The best way to address this is to have the rest of the world move along with us on the greening pathway. And we have jurisdictions that are very committed, like North America. On sustainable fuels, we actually have quite a lot of consensus around the world. We have this agreed objective of 5% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030 from the use of sustainable fuels. Of course, there's no world government, and it will be up to every jurisdiction to see how they implement those 5%. In Europe, we've opted for a mandate with, in addition, financial support. To the earlier point about sticks and carrots, there is financial support in Europe. So we need to convince also the rest of the world to move along, and we see this is happening. The US is going all out on sustainable fuels. A country like Singapore has a sustainable fuel policy, so it's really gaining ground. That's the best way to address that. If there is an additional issue to be addressed, we would have to look at what could be done, like we are doing in other sectors of the economy, so that we are not victimizing our own industry.
We'll go back later on the rest of the world point, but I want to go back to Axel now. Clean Aviation has a clear mission to develop innovative technologies to reduce aircraft emissions of CO2 and other gases and reduce noise. To achieve this, you expect to have greener aircraft in the skies by 2035 and starting flying testing technologies by 2027. Are you still confident that these targets will be met? And what is the main obstacle you have found so far?
Confidence level reasonable. No guarantee at all, but this is technology development. There is no guarantee. When you see where we are right now, we are, with regard to those technologies, we are at what we call technology readiness level 3, 4, sometimes only 2. And we need to bring those technologies to what we call technology readiness level 6. 6 is demonstrated either on the ground or in flight. So, for example, the engine we were talking about, the open rotor engine, we are going to fly it on a flight test bed in order to see whether it's mature enough to be finally going into the development process and finally being certified and then being in service at an aircraft level. So that time frame between now and 2027, 8, 9 is exactly the time frame we are bringing those technologies from the existing level to the demonstrated in flight or on ground, depending a bit what is necessary. And I think the biggest hurdle for us is to make sure that we are not entering then into what we call the valley of death, where basically those technologies will be all demonstrated, but at component level. So demonstrating the engine in flight, demonstrating a fuel cell in flight. But this is definitely not an aircraft. And the question is always, how do those technologies then enter into the development process? And aviation is risk averse for good reasons. And those technologies usually, it's like a funnel. But at the end, the funnel becomes very, very thin. And the high reward technologies have high risk. That's the nature of it. And I think what we need to do to take specifically care that those technologies have a very solid TL6 or potentially even, and this is something we need to develop together with the European Commission in order to see whether we could even go one step beyond and produce aircraft-level demonstrators, as they are doing it in the United States right now. So they have 2 aircraft-level demonstrators in order to reduce that risk and make sure that the highest possible level of technologies with the lowest possible risk can enter into the development process and finally enter into service.
I know that a particular issue when it comes to developing a new aircraft is prototyping. Yeah. And that's
what I'm referring to, basically.
Very delicate.
Yes.
Yeah. Would you like to see? I mean, we know that safety is paramount when we're talking about aviation, and that's the number 1 priority. But I've heard that it's not easy to develop a prototype in Europe, and it's harder than in other parts of the world. So, would you like to see new and simpler rules when it comes to this type of development?
Definitely. We have an example in the previous program which we were running, Clean Sky, so where we had a helicopter, smaller investment, small vehicle, smaller investment, and there we build a prototype. And this prototype is basically building that bridge between technology development and aircraft development and entry into service. In the United States, they have at the moment 2 of those prototypes. One is called truss-braced wing, and the other one is called blended wing body. And I'm envying the colleagues in the States for this tool because we don't have something similar in Europe at that scale. But it's also not cheap. I mean, those programs cost each $1 billion, so that needs to be afforded. But I think that bridges the gap which we have today. And I'm quite concerned that we are going to develop all those technology at component level, and finally they won't make it at aircraft into the aircraft development process because it might be perceived as too risky. So I think we need to inject a tool there which we don't have yet available.
Rania, when it comes to decarbonization, we know that sustainable aviation fuels are basically the most important tool to reduce aviation emissions in the short and medium term. Last week, I was at the World Aviation Festival in Amsterdam, and talking to some airline representatives, I had the impression that the introduction of sustainable fuels already requires a lot of effort, and both at economic and regulatory level. So if these fuels, this sustainable fuel is the main tool, why not just focus on that and leave electric aircraft, hydrogen aircraft to private innovators? Would you prefer Europe to focus only on sustainable fuels and put all its money and energy into the transition from kerosene? Or are you happy that EU money is also spent on financing clean aviation alternatives?
There is no single silver bullet to decarbonize aviation. So we've already done the exercise. We in Airlines for Europe sat together with the Regional Airlines Association, the airports, the air navigation services, and the OEMs, the aircraft and engine manufacturers, and have had this conversation of how do you get to destination 2050. And it's always a combination of many things. The 2 biggest contributors are SAF, that's true, and the other bit is the aircraft and engine tech. Both of those are needed. The third bit is better airspace management, and that includes technology, which would make our skies a bit more smart. You have an interesting story around how a traffic man can be more inefficient than a traffic light, and that's sort of something we need to think about. How do we bring these new technologies also up in the air, managing how we fly around Europe and the world? So no, I certainly do not think that only SAF needs money. I think all of this needs a lot of money, and it needs a combination of the public money and private money. So my members spend a lot of money. We spend about 160 billion by 2030 on new planes, 15 billion on SAF. We actually invest in SAF production projects as well, just to help show the commitment that it's a good investment and there's something that many more people should put their money in. And I hear stories from other people who I know have money that, yeah, my shareholder is not really keen on investing in SAF, or I'm not sure would that ever work, and will you guys make it? And I think that's the kind of thing that also Draghi talked about. You need to bring a bit more confidence in the market and talk about how do you de-risk some investments, how do you get people confident to put their money in a roadmap that we have all committed to and are investing a lot of money. But that spread needs to be across the clean tech, the SAF, and that rollout up in the skies as well.
And This one also for you, Rania. Let's talk about money. When summarizing the different approaches between the EU and the US in terms of sustainable fuels and decarbonization strategy and so on, we tend to simplify by saying that EU has the carrots, the incentives, and the EU has the stick, which are the mandates. Of course, those who follow this topic know that it's not that easy, that it's just a simplification, but let's keep it for now. Do you expect some more carrots coming from the European Union in the next mandate? And if yes, where would you think that these carrots should go?
I think they should be spread out across most of us. So we have SAF allowances as aircraft operators to help us bridge the gap for the price of kerosene to SAF, because it's 2 to 3 times more expensive, and that has a big impact on the cost of flying for everybody. So that's an important tool that is there and needs to be continued. And then you need to put that money, in my opinion, between innovation, between funneling attracting private investment and bringing those kind of guarantees. I'm in no way a finances expert, but what I'm looking for is money that will help stimulate innovation, R&D, taking it through the valley of death so that I can buy it one day soon and fly you all around the world and Europe with. And I need a climate, an investment climate that is positive around that, because when you are a hard-to-abate sector, and as an airline, you have to think about it. I mean, our job is to fly people safely in the planes, and it's very complex to do just that. And then we rely on someone else to give us the tools that will make us decarbonize and be sustainable as well, more sustainable. So what I want is the confidence in the system that we can make this, and that invest in this is the right thing to do. And it will take money, you're right, it's absolutely a lot of money, but it's also a great business opportunity for everybody who does it. If this is the next generation of aviation, then why wouldn't we be investing in this next generation? We have today discussions about why Europe missed the last digital leap, right? And why we don't have so many unicorns and so many big digital companies here in Europe. There's a lesson to be learned there in my sector as well. How can we make those kind of big unicorns for aviation technology, clean tech?
And talking about investments, Ursula von der Leyen has promised a clean industrial deal to be announced in the first 100 days of her second term. Philip, will the aviation sector be part of the clean industrial deal?
I'm tempted to say you have to wait 100 days to find out.
Come on.
But no, I cannot prejudge what will be in there. But I would say that the aeronautical sector ticks a lot of boxes of the criteria that are mentioned in the political guidelines. It's a sector that needs greening. It's a sector that is required, let's say, that's serving our economy, that is important for the wider dynamism and competitiveness of our economy. It's a competitive sector in itself. It's a high-tech sector, and it's one of the sectors where we are still leading the world in Europe in some domains together with the US, but between us, we are leading the world in aircraft technology, in engines, in air traffic management systems. And if we want to stay that way, we have to invest, and we have to support those industries and indeed avoid, as you were hinting, some cases in the past where we've developed the technology and we've created the demand by creating a regulation that demands greening, but somebody else has moved into the production. So we have, I think, an opportunity in aviation to make the best of the greening, to create, or let's say not create, to support an industry that will deliver those products.
You say a sector where we are leaders in the world. Sounds like the car sector. And we know now that in the car sector there are some issues, and some CEOs are also connecting those issues to the European policies and to a transition. Are you worried that at some point you will find the same issues that you're now finding in the automotive sector in the aviation one?
I don't know anything about automotive sector, so I won't comment on that. But I go back to what I just said, which is that aeronautics is really a domain where we are still leading. But if you want to continue to lead, you have to be in front of the others, and that means that you have to have the research, the product development, the manufacturing industry, and the demand behind it, and the capital to finance all that. Because in Europe, maybe where we can do still better, we have quite a lot of public support. I think somebody told me that in terms of research, if you take together the EU level and the member states, we are more or less the same level as the United States. So there we're doing rather okay. We should bundle more with our member states when it comes to research, but we are less good in tapping capital markets, venture capital. I think the Draghi report also refers to that very strongly, and that's what is key in that valley of death phase that Axel was referring to. We're also maybe not so good in using defense sector to help aeronautical products come to maturity, as some others are. So there are some domains where we can make ourselves better equipped to meet that challenge.
I will start taking some questions that are coming through Slido, and please I invite you also to ask.
Just to add
please,
on, just to add what Philip said, I think on top of the values, the financial values, which are different in the US, what I read as well, that overall in Europe it's the same amount, but when you look at aviation, the support in the US is much stronger, not to speak about China. I mean, forget China overall, although the products they are putting into the market now are maybe not yet as competitive as they could be, but the next generation of products will definitely be competitive. But when I look at European level and the fragmentation at European level, I think that's also something where we need to do our homework. We need to do our homework at the interface, as Philip mentioned, between what we do at European level and what is going to be done at member state level, at regional level. Today, we are all working more or less independently. We are talking to each other, but it's more talking to each other without a clear mandate to integrate it, without a clear mandate to find common grounds, to define a common strategy, to have a kind of work share. This does not exist. It's much easier in the US or in China, where it's either one country or one government. And this fragmentation is something coming on top of the, I would say, underfinancing. This fragmentation doesn't help either. So we need to do and work on both fields.
I will also ask Rania to intervene on this because, of course, when we are talking about the rest of the world, there are countries like India, like China, that are like doing massive orders of aircraft. Like the highest so far has been 500 aircraft, all in one deal. And you can see like a very strong contrast with what's happening here in Europe, where I can tell you, I get questions on Slido where I've been asked, is reduction of demand also part of the picture of decarbonizing the aviation sector? So do you think that this big difference that we have right now between Europe and the rest of the world will at some point become a disadvantage for European airlines? We will just have like a reduction of offer, not of demand, from the European airlines and more foreign airlines coming to Europe.
So there's a couple of things in your question, and if I can break them up. One is, we were talking about carrots and sticks. I'm going to go to apples and pears, and soon I'm going to be feeling peckish, quite honestly, but sorry for that. India and Europe are not comparable. So India is not at the same level of how many people, the percentage of the population that flies. So India putting in an order of 500 plus planes is one thing, reflective of the state where India is at. Moving on from that, Europe does fly, and Europe does rely on flying to stay connected within Europe and with the rest of the world. The net result, the impact, let's be honest, the impact of decarbonization will be that the cost will go up, and that will have some reduction in demand. That will be a part of the net result of all that is happening. That's part of the calculation of how we arrive to net zero as well. We expect that some people will choose not to fly because they have a better option, because they have that value in life, and that's acceptable. I think the bit that's most important is the bit that you hinted at, that we should all have the choice and the opportunity to fly, that we should give that option to everybody. And indeed, if we don't take care of that bit, if we don't make sure that European airlines stay competitive, and that within Europe we can stay connected, then we're really going to lose out on something. I mean, there's economic studies out there that demonstrate that you need to be in proximity of a center of wealth of like 2 to 3, maximum 4 hours, if you're going to have a certain level of prosperity as a territory. And when you look at Europe, I mean, that's fundamentally how we've become a success story in the EU. We all got to know each other 20-odd years ago now, and learned to trust each other and started doing business with each other. So keeping the ends connected to each other remains an important bit. And definitely that is something that I worry about and that I understand is now coming back on the table as a serious conversation, that how do you safeguard competitiveness of European airlines as a way to safeguard and nurture and continue to reinforce the competitiveness of Europe. And I understand that's part of what we're going to do next.
And about competitiveness, I have another question for Philippe, because a big and important part of the decarbonization strategy in Europe when it comes to aviation and also to keep the sector competitive is that sustainable aviation fuels will have to go down in price, because right now they are way more expensive than kerosene. How can you be so sure that in an age where everything is becoming more expensive, SAF will become cheaper?
Well, we don't know for sure, obviously, but and I'm not an industrialist, but very often when you have a nascent industry, prices tend to be high. When the industry matures, production technologies improve, volumes increase, then prices tend to go down. We've seen that with solar power, for example, massively. That's an expectation, a reasonable expectation, as Axel was saying earlier. But I agree with what Rania was saying. Flying will become more expensive. I think we have to be honest about that, because these products are more complex, particularly when we think about synthetic fuel. And there's, at the end, there's nothing wrong with that. Our estimations, the price impact will not be enormous, but there will be an increase, and it will be up to passenger, to the citizen, to decide whether that's worth his or her while. We see that there's actually a lot of demand for travel, a lot of demand for air travel. We've seen airfares, I think many of you have experienced that yourselves, increase quite a lot since the pandemic.
And it's not for decarbonization, I think.
No, exactly. Prices have gone up by 20%, and there's more demand than ever before. So let's just think that there is some margin that passengers are ready to accept, particularly if it means greening on top. And so we believe that the way to go is to green aviation. We know how to do it. We are mandating 70% SAF by 2050. That will be the biggest contributor. It's a technology that is known today. It's a safe bet. It's not speculative, can be done. It will require a lot of ramping up, a lot of investment, but this is a realistic pathway towards decarbonization of aviation. That's really the way to go.
Rania, you met the CEOs of several airlines this morning. Do you think they are ready to tell their customers that they will have to pay more for their flights?
I think it's for everyone to tell their customer, including the politicians who have made this decision as a roadmap, that we should all be telling our people honestly about what's happening. It's not what an airline wants to do, but what we're looking to do is to make it as easy a transition as we can for everybody. Because fundamentally, what my members care about is flying remains accessible and an option to everybody. Okay, I mean, I'm sure it's not the policy of. I've not met a politician who's told me, Rania, I think poor people should no longer fly. I don't think that's the point. So we can talk about what policy mix might be needed. We already have that for remote areas where anyway flying is subsidized because it's part of how you get to an island, for example, in my country. But I think fundamentally we're all trying to do is make that a good, smooth transition for everybody and keep it affordable and accessible for everyone.
I also want to talk about another challenge that we have when we're talking about sustainable aviation, which is the one of the workforce. Of course, if we are investing in alternatives to the current aircraft, we will have to also have a reskilling of the workers in the OEMs, on the manufacturer side. At what stage we are when it comes to this process, and how confident you are, Axel, that Europe will maintain its centrality when it comes to manufacturing aircraft in the future?
resources, there is no short-term fix. This is a very long-term goal and long-term journey. And it starts at unis. It starts at unis where people are being involved in research, and those people are developing the technologies and their skills. I see that today what we have in our program, in the Clean Sky program, we had 1,000 entities from all over Europe involved with 5,000 scientists and engineers, and they developed 600-something patents. And there you see the competences being developed by the people. And this graduates coming from uni, going then into initial jobs in industry, they are growing in industry, and those research projects will definitely help to grow their competences. And I think specifically when you look at competences in fields like hybrid electric or hydrogen, even worse, there is very little competence existing today. And that's why those technology programs are also educating people and are bringing people to speed in areas where there is very limited competence in Europe at the moment. Maybe not even in Europe, at a worldwide scale even. And I think that's another beauty of those type of programs we are running. It's about the technology itself, but it's also about the network which is being created, so connecting those entities, but also connecting the people to new knowledge and gaining that new knowledge. And coming back maybe to what you said in terms of cost, by improving the fuel burn by 30%, will not help to compensate totally the cost, but it will help a little bit. 35% of the cost is fuel. And if you take 30% of that cost out already, it helps to compensate a little bit. And if we then not go for SAF, but go for hydrogen, which is cheaper than power to liquid, for example, that could be another option. So there are various options where technology can contribute as well to maintain aviation to be affordable.
It's also true, on the other hand, that if you want to switch to hydrogen, you will need a massive investment in terms of technologies and particularly infrastructure, because you cannot even have just a few airports with hydrogen, because if your aircraft gets diverted because of the weather or any other problem, then what? What do we do with the aircraft stuck?
But when you look at the how many commercial airports are there worldwide? Between 3,000 and 4,000 worldwide at the moment. And we have alone 60,000 gas stations for our cars in Europe. And they have diesel, they have E5, E10, I can't remember, but they have 5 different fuels, and that's possible. 60,000 alone in Europe, and we have 3,000 to 4,000 airports worldwide. There is definitely an investment to be taken in order to convert those, but it's not a one-shot investment, it's an investment over time. So I think the hydrogen journey, I think it's going to be in parallel. We will have SAF and we will have hydrogen, and the benefits of hydrogen, as I said, when you have, for example, fuel cell-powered aircraft, there is no CO2, there is no NOx as well, when you speak about the non-CO2 greenhouse gases, and it's going to be cheaper. So I think the race is still open, but I believe we need to pursue both avenues in order to see which one is the best one at the end.
And I will take another question from Slido. This one is coming from Antonio Camargo, Brazil. In my view, if SAF puts its future on biomass derivatives, it will simply fail simply due to lack of land, supply, and sustainability. What is your view? Question from everyone.
Yes. And we don't eat enough French fries in order to have the cooking oil available either.
I'm getting hungry. You have to stop.
No, that doesn't help either. We
French
need to go
fries
to,
is a sensitive issue here in Belgium.
We need to go to power to liquid in the end. This is the only scalable route, and this is expensive.
That's why we have introduced also in the SAF mandate a small synthetic fuel mandate starting already in 2030. Even though it's more expensive and there is still enough biomass available until sometime in the second half next decade, we estimate. But by then we will run out of feedstock. Or let's say the volume will not increase anymore, and the additional SAF that we need after 2035, 2040 will have to be synthetic fuel. So that's why we need to build this industry from the start. It's not simple either, because you need a lot of green energy for this purpose, and this is outside our control. You were hinting at that before. These are external factors that will determine the path that aviation will take, which are in the energy sector. So very often today, any policy is energy policy, and we will be dependent on a big ramp up of production of green electricity to produce those synthetic fuels.
So far, we haven't seen big
Just add to
investments.
that. Sorry,
Yeah, I will just ask the question, and of course also on this one if you want to comment. But we haven't seen from the big fuel producers investment into the SAF production. Why is that? What's wrong with the SAF product? Is a high demand, high price?
Do you have a fuel producer on the panel?
But there is production. And our estimates are that for the mandate in the remainder of this decade, we are okay. For synthetic fuel from 2030, it's more complicated. There is still time to build the production capacity, but not so much. So this really has to be a focus in the coming months and years to build that up. And afterwards, there is indeed a huge ramp-up a fast ramp-up in the 2030s and 40s of our mandate. So we will need the energy sector to invest massively. This will be, when I spoke earlier about staying the course on the Green Deal, it's also about not inventing new things, but making sure that what we have decided is implemented and follow up the industrial and economic realities that are behind it. So we will need that huge increase in the coming years.
Rania, you wanted to jump in.
I was actually going to underline what you've just said, that when we think about how we're going to get there, we need to be forward-looking as well. So we need to be putting projects in the pipeline now that will bring the synthetic fuel that I will need in about 10 years' time. And that's, so when you start making investment decisions, you cannot only decide that, okay, what's the first thing that can hit the market in the next 5 years? You also have to think, what do I need to be feeding the system so that in 15 years I have the next generation of technology?
Well, if I may add, one of the issues is that aviation sector is actually quite small in the bigger energy. It's a niche in the energy sector. So it's not the first point of attention probably in boardrooms in the energy majors. But we have to get their attention. And one way of doing that is with our mandate. We are convinced this is the way to go. Not every jurisdiction in the world has followed us, but we see, actually earlier this week, I was reading one major US airline saying they wanted to have a mandate. The nice thing about mandates, and some people call it sticks, but I would call it a framework that creates legal certainty and predictability for the industry, that they will make an investment into producing a product that is more expensive than a competing product, but there will be a market. We are creating that market. With our mandate, so we have to stick to that and not change our mind on requiring those volumes from the big energy companies. And by the way, there is a system of penalties in our regulation. If they don't deliver, they will have to pay a significant fine, and they will still have to deliver last year's volumes the year after.
Of course, the stakes. Please.
In terms of, sorry.
Go for it.
In terms of predictability, just to build on that, there is something which is called ASEA, Alliance for Zero Emission Aviation in Europe. 160, 170 different entities from OEMs, engine producers, researchers, fuel producers, everyone, in order to build a common roadmap. So what needs to be done? By when? In order to fulfill those that ambition. And I think this is also an initiative which I believe is among maybe various initiatives, but leading to a very concrete understanding of what needs to be done and what does it cost. So who needs to do something at the airport? Who needs to do something at a fuel provider? Who needs to do something with regard to energy provision? What needs to be done at air traffic management? We haven't spoken about that. There is going to be quite some significant changes to be expected because those new aircraft, at least partially, will have a different optimum flight profile. So that requires ATM to adapt. All of those changes need to come. And that's definitely something that initiatives like ASEA concentrate on in order to build concrete roadmaps of what can be done next.
As we are approaching to the end of this panel, I want to take another question from Slido. This one is again about SAF. RefuelEU put in place mandates increasing sharply every 5 years. Could we have a more linear increase to incentivize investments in new production capabilities? Is there something you are studying, like we have this say big difference between a target to another, depending on...
Well, we are starting, the choice that was made with the legislator was to start rather quickly. This was adopted last year, will enter into force in a couple of months, in the 1st of January. The first mandate starts. So to start quickly with a limited volumes, give the industry time to adapt and ramp up volumes more quickly in the next decade and beyond. It's just a realistic way to build up, and I don't think a pure linear approach is necessarily the right way to go. And we have no intention of changing the pathway. We will review the regulation, the framework in a couple of years when we have the first 2 years of experience to see if some things are not working. But fundamentally, our objective is to stick to the path that has been laid out in order to create that legal certainty and manage expectations. Because if you give the impression you might change your mind, then investment will stop immediately.
Well, with that, I'd like to say thank you to all our panelists for a fascinating interview and discussion. I think that it has given us, all of us, some insights into the exciting future of aviation. We will just like to take a look at the results of the poll. If we can have on the screen. Thank you. So just to remember the question, which of these technologies has the biggest impact on aviation decarbonization? What is your reply? If you don't have one,
it depends on the time frame. Depends on the time frame. 2050, 2060, 2040, the answer will be different.
Yes.
I think the answer is we need all of that. We need 100%.
Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah.
So everybody is right. Finally, thank you all for joining us today. You, the audience, for joining us in person, and for those who are tuning in online. And finally, thanks to our partner, GE Aerospace, for making this event possible. We'd love to hear your feedback, so feel free to email us about the event at live@politico.eu. And finally, you can check out the program of Sustainable Future Week, where I'll be quizzing other panelists on similar topics. Our Politico events website has the latest lineup on all our events happening this year. You can find that at www.politico.eu/events. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
United in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
If we do not renew our partnerships with the rest of the world, Europe will not be relevant.
We can make it if we are together as Europeans.
Do you genuinely believe that countries will manage to reach these very ambitious targets?